再去。
Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Learning Chess with me. Sadly, we will not be talking about chess today. We will be talking about World War I for our World Wars unit. Today, Orange will talk to you about World War I, how it happened, and the whole story. Now, Orange, you may begin.
Sorry, he meant World War II. We will do World War I in the next video. So, World War I was actually kind of the cause for World War II. World War II started in 1939, September 1st, when Germany invaded Poland. But there were other causes that tempted Germany to invade Poland. So, in 1918, when Germany lost the war, in 1919 they agreed to the Treaty of Versailles, taking full blame of starting the war, but actually Austria started the war. So they had to pay the winners more than $1 trillion in today's profit. And they had to give up chunks of the land that actually kind of split the country into two. Adolf Hitler vowed to get revenge for this humiliation for Germany. So, in 1937, they invaded Hungary, Austria, which gave up without a fight. Then they invaded Denmark, Norway. Norway was very important because it contained heavy water. Heavy water is used to make atomic bombs. And they also conquered the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Basically, in 1940, the French surrendered. And in 1939, they invaded Poland, which I said earlier, made Britain and France the Third War. France got conquered, so they dropped out of the war. And and they also had a peace with Germany. It was the Soviet Union, which is now modern-day Russia. So back then Poland, so they split Poland between them. And in 1941, they launched the war against Britain. The war with Britain, which was a German loss. And in 1941, Americans joined the war after the Japanese attacked them at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Also in 1941, the Germans invaded the Soviet Union because the Germans feared the Americans' industrial might. Once the Americans' industrial might reached its full scale, there was no stopping it. So it decided to invade the Soviet Union, use its own materials to help themselves defeat America. But the Soviet Union invasion turned out to be a huge disaster. The German was winning until they could see the Russian Moscow Tower. So they invaded Stalingrad, which was the second atomic mine to Moscow. But Stalingrad was a huge loss, and the Germans went back, and the Soviets quickly pushed them back. Also in 1942, the Battle of the Toro Sea took place. The Toro Sea no one won the Toro Sea. The Japanese lost one carrier, and the Americans also lost one carrier, USS Lexington. In 1942, the Pacific War theater started to change. During 1942, the Japanese decided to invade Midway, which turned out to be a huge disaster because the USA had already decrypted the message. The Japanese lost 4 carriers, 1 destroyer, and 250 planes, while the US lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, and 50 fighters. With the Battle of Midway, the tide in the Pacific War began to change. In the European theater, the Russians were slowly starting to push them back. And in 1942, you probably heard of this island. It was called Guadalcanal, or the Solomon Islands. But Japanese tried to invade Australia in the Cold Sea, but that failed, as you saw just 1 minute before. So whoever controlled the Solomon Islands controlled the war. So the Americans began the Battle of Guadalcanal. The Americans won Guadalcanal, and they started doing an island hopping campaign. They started doing an island hopping campaign to reach the Japanese and use their B-29s to bomb cities of Japan. In the European theater in 1944, D-Day began. D-Day landed in Normandy, France, but they tried to trick the Germans to thinking it was another city. When D-Day landed, the D-Day whole point was to land in France, and then they would start pushing into Berlin. As well, the Soviets were pushing into Berlin too. So it was just only a matter of time before Germany would start losing the war. So D-Day was a huge success for the Allies. They managed to gain a foothold in France, and the Germans saw this. They began the Battle of the Bulge, which was actually starting to push the Allies back out of France. In the Pacific theater, the U.S. claimed the Philippines, which used to be theirs, and they started claiming China, which used to be under U.S. occupation. In 1945, Germany surrendered, and Germany also began the Holocaust, which was the murder of 6 million Jews. And Germany surrendered when Berlin was conquered by the Soviets. In the Pacific theater, the Japanese claimed that they would never surrender, and the Americans took this message seriously, so they knew they wouldn't do a home invasion of Japan. Instead, they made 2 atomic bombs, which they tested in New Mexico because it was deserted during that time, and they dropped 1 bomb on Hiroshima first, which cost 70,000 lives, and the radiation infected the area too. And then they dropped another bomb on Nagasaki, which made the Japanese surrender. Most people believe that the atomic bombs made Japanese surrender, but it was actually the Soviets that made Japanese surrender. But you do notice the Japanese and Soviets were Russians. It became the Soviet Union in 1921, had a war with each other, and Japan won. But the Soviets now have defeated Russia, which thought country Japan, and Japan took the atomic bomb as an excuse, so they surrendered to the Americans, and that was the end of World War II. No, Andy, finish.
Continue.
We will talk about World War I in the next video.
Yes. Thank you, Orange, for the explanation. Yes. Thank you for Orange explanation. World War I will come in the next video, as Orange said. Subscribe to our channel, and you will master elementary and middle school social study and history.